Hi, I'm Hua. I'm an Irish non-binary illustrator and comic artist, and I'm currently finishing up my BA in illustration at Plymouth College of Art. I can't recommend PCA enough, especially for illustration. Being a small specialist arts college allows for really personal and hands-on teaching that gets the best out of students. I certainly think it got the best out of me. This is me looking pretty pleased with myself beside an electrical box I painted in the autumn. And this is what my work looks like. I do a mix of editorial illustration, apparel and accessory design, comics, and recently I've been branching into non-fiction educational work, normally to do with mental health or social justice. I was also the character designer for a game called Inertial Drift, which is coming out later this year. Visually, I'm really inspired by fashion, both runway and street style, nature, LGBT history, psychedelia, mythology, josei manga, and Catholic iconography. I think my main goal as an artist is always to make work that provokes introspection and understanding between people. My workspace isn't particularly exciting at the moment because most of my stuff is still in Plymouth, but I do keep a lot of books, comics and zines nearby for whenever I need some inspiration. Recently I've been doing a lot of my work that doesn't require a desk in my garden, just to switch things up a bit. I'm really not very picky about materials. I kind of just use whatever I have on me at the time. A lot of the pens and stuff that I use are things that I've accumulated throughout the years. I draw a lot in my free time still, so here's a little peek into my personal sketchbook. My graduate project is called CMYK, and it's a pitch packet for a graphic novel about an up-and-coming non-binary model who is struggling with the horror of being seen on a large scale. The book is an exploration of how surveillance culture polices people of marginalised identities, as well as an attempt to explain what gender dysphoria feels like to those who will never experience it. In CMYK, the main character's body shifts and changes based on the perceptions of the person looking at them, throwing them into psychological turmoil over their true identity. In writing the story, I was really inspired by films like Get Out and Perfect Blue because of how they utilise the horror genre as a framework for social commentary and criticism. Often when I start a big project, I like to create mood boards in order to get a feel for the characters and narrative. In this instance, I spent a lot of time experimenting with the appearance of the main character because they needed a distinctive enough design that they'd remain recognisable even as their body and features shifted throughout the narrative. I tend to think of narrative projects like this in two parts. One, what am I saying with the script and the words and the story itself? And two, what am I saying through the visual language that I'm using? So for this comic, I was spending a lot of time thinking about how I was going to use colour, pattern, shape, and really build upon the fact that this comic is set in the fashion world. I was interested in seeing how I could use visual language to describe the sense of someone losing their grip on reality. The main part of the pitch packet is an 11-page sample sequence set in the middle of the story, wherein the main character becomes overwhelmed at a photo shoot and falls into a dissociative spiral. So in working on this sequence, I first wrote a rough script and then thumbnailed all of the pages in my sketchbook. I would move the thumbnails over to my iPad and clean them up, then print them out and use my lightbox to actually ink the pages. And then I would move those inks back to my iPad in order to colour them. It seems like a pretty roundabout process, but it works for me, so that's all that really matters. The colouring is probably the hardest step because I approach it in quite an intuitive way, and sometimes that can be quite time consuming when things aren't working out the way that you want them to. My visual inspiration for this project came from several different places. Comics-wise, I've been looking at Snock Girl by Brian Lee O'Malley and Leslie Hung, Helter Skelter by Kyoko Okazaki, Through the Woods by Emily Carroll, as well as a bunch of Junji Ito's short stories. The 1977 Suspiria movie was a big influence in developing my colour palette. I love how they used saturated colours in that movie to create a sense of unease. I wanted to steer away from using the cold, dark palettes that you traditionally associate with horror, and Suspiria is just such a good example of that. Fashion is an important part of the story, so I referenced the work of a lot of designers and brands throughout my development process in trying to get a feel for what the character would wear. This included Harris Reed, Pierre Moss, Moschino, Tomo Kozumi, Paloma Spain, and most notably Richard Quinn. During the development phase, I had this repeating image in my mind of a model wearing intricately patterned clothing that would begin to melt off their body and spread into the world around them. It became this visual signifier of delirium within the comic, and the concept kind of arose out of me learning about dazzle camouflage, which was this incredibly wacky graphic camo used on ships in World War I to confuse enemy gunmen about a ship's position and which direction it was heading. So within the confines of the comic, this garment becomes a kind of optical camouflage for non-binary people that distorts the contours of their body. Because of PCA's deadline extension, I'm actually still working on finishing up this project. So right now I'm mocking up some installation artifacts that I was planning on producing for our degree show, including this large sculptural mirror which would be laser cut out of wood and acrylic. I'll be producing a 3D render of it for my deadline, but hopefully I can build the real thing at some point in the future. Other than that, I'm mostly just finishing up designs and character sheets for some of the book's other characters that didn't happen to feature in the sample sequence that I made for the pitch packet. Living in a society where most people think of gender in a binary way can be quite challenging as someone who doesn't fit within the system. It messes with your head when you know yourself to be one thing but everyone around you sees something else. That's why this project is really close to my heart. It's an attempt to explore the kind of everyday madness involved in being gender non-conforming. I hope that someone from an outside perspective could read this book and maybe come to understand and empathise with what non-binary people go through on a day-to-day basis. I hope this has been an illuminating little intro into me and my practice. If you'd like to keep up to date with my progress on CMYK or just see more of my work, you can check out my website, hwaok.com, or follow me on Instagram at hwa.ok.